Hello and welcome to Tight Lines. In the old days of the statutory close season, sensible anglers would leave the rivers alone until the elderberries were ripe. And they're ripe, so it's river time. Celebrating the fact with me this week is Duncan Charman, who loves all his fishing, but like me, is probably at his happiest when the water goes sideways. We're talking over what's currently happening on our rivers and looking at some fish catching ideas. And as well as that, we'll be seeing Paul Garner on the River Severn at Hampton Road in Shropshire in search of probably our hardest fighting coarse fish species, the barbel. And Andy Ford visits our most iconic stretch of river, the world famous royalty fishery on the Hampshire Avon, for a celebration of float fishing. In Fishery Focus, I'll have information on what tactics, tackle and baits have been working around the country for all types of anglers. Well, Duncan, you're back again, and it is really now the time to start forgetting about lakes. The tench have slipped off a bit, the bream, you know, the carp are coming up to carp time, but it's river o'clock, isn't it?
Oh, definitely. The daddy long legs are actually, you know, getting about in the mornings and the evenings. There's the old spiders' webs and dewy mornings, and to me, chilly nights mean get back on the rivers now.
I mentioned elderberries right at the start there because last year I had elderberries ripe in the field where my wife's horse lives right at the start of the season. And they're just coming ripe now, but they're 3 times as big as last year. Massive, great things. And they're a great bait, aren't they?
Oh, they are. They're a little bit... Everything's a little bit late, though, at the moment, isn't it? You know, but I can't say that I've actually used elderberries, but I know, you know, in the older days, or a long time ago, that they were a prime bait, weren't they?
What you mean for old boys like me?
Oh.
Well, it's been lovely having you on the show. To see you again sometime. For many river anglers, the end of summer means just one thing. It's barbel time. The fish are fully recovered from spawning and are usually seriously on the munch. Paul Garner's local river's the Severn, which happens to be just about the best when it comes to catching barbel, so we join him on the way to a great day's fishing.
Well, I've dropped into one of my favourite pegs today here down at Hampton Road. It's a bend coming off of a real shallow riffle and dropping into some deeper water. But the biggest problem I had today was the weather's been all over the place this last week. We've just come out of this real hot spell when, to be honest, the river was really low as I've ever seen it, and fishing hard. We've got a little bit of colour today, which is definitely going to help with the fishing, but the level's not really come up very much. But because I didn't know what was going to happen today, I've had to bring quite a range of bait with me, more than I'd normally bring, to be honest. If the river was really low, I'd concentrate really just on a maggot attack in a swim feeder. So I brought about a gallon of maggots with me, more than I'm going to need, but just in case the fish really go mad. And I'm going to feed that with a little bit of hemp. I've brought about 3 or 4 pints of hemp with me as well that I've cooked up at home. And that's probably going to be the main attack today because the river's not too high. I'm going to start off fishing the maggot feeder today because the river's, it's got a little bit of colour but not too much, and the small baits like maggot tend to work really well in these conditions. So I'll just take you through the rig that I'm using because it's a little bit different to what you might expect at this time of year. And the key thing really, I mean, one of the main things I do is I'm using real maggots, 3 or 4 real maggots on a size 14 forged hook, but I've also got an artificial maggot on a hair as well. And the reason for that is it helps deter the small fish. If I was just going to use real maggots, then within seconds the rod top would be dancing and bouncing around as all the small fish would be trying to nip the maggots away. But I find that just by putting a rubber maggot on like that, it helps act as a deterrent. And even if the real maggots get taken off, you've still got a rubber bait, an artificial bait on there as well, doing the job. Now, all the time really when I'm barbel fishing, I use a long hook length. And I'm going to start off today with about 4 foot, and that's 8 pound fluorocarbon. That's about as light as I'll fish really. It's not too snaggy in this swim. And the reason really for a long hook length when you're barbel fishing is because, not to do with the hook length really, it's more to do with the main line, because what happens is that feeder will sit on the bottom and the main line will get dragged up in the current. And what you don't want is the barbel brushing into that and giving you line bites, because that's what will spook them. got, upstream of my swim here, we've got a big area of shallow water, which is only about 18 inches to 2 foot deep. It really speeds up and starts putting a bit more oxygen back into the water. And this then drops off into quite a big pool. It's about 40 or 50 yards long, and I'm fishing just where the water drops away to about 7 foot. The fish at this time of year will generally spend most of the time in these deeper pools, and I'm aiming really for about the centre of the river where there's a slightly deeper channel, only about a foot or so deeper than the rest of it, but that's the main kind of area that the fish are going to be sitting in at the moment. It's almost like a highway up and down the river, and I'm really just going to keep recasting every 10 or 15 minutes to try and put a bit of a trail of bait down there. To begin with, I'll start fishing almost straight out in front of me, get that trail of maggots and hemp going down, that wafting that scent down the river. And if I catch a couple of fish there and it goes a bit quiet, then what I'll do is I'll drop the feeder a bit further down, because it could be the fish have just moved it downstream a bit because of the pressure. But we'll cross that bridge when we come to it. We'll just concentrate on trying to catch the first one. I was just getting a bit distracted then by the steam train parked up above us, and it was quite easy to get distracted because I've been fishing for a couple of hours and I'd not really had a bite of anything really. Even the maggots were coming back unsucked from the small fish, and all of a sudden, not the usual sort of 3 foot twitch you would expect from a barbel, just quite a tappy little bite, but I just cast it a little bit further downstream, just suspecting that maybe the fish had backed off and weren't coming up to the top of the swim. Not the biggest barbel I've ever caught, and certainly not the biggest barbel in this stretch, but it's what we've come for. Barbel about 2.5 pound. That'll do for starters. Takes the pressure off a little bit. But that is one of the beauties of using maggots as a hook bait for barbel, is that it doesn't just catch the big ones, it will catch the little ones as well, and it can give you a good idea of the stock levels in some of the rivers, because a lot of people fish pellets or boilies, which are really only going to catch you the bigger fish, but the maggots will catch them of all sizes from a pound upwards really, and that's an absolute minter. I've been fishing the River Severn on and off for about 30 years now. It's amazing how the river's changed, and particularly the barbel population's changed in those years. When I first moved over this way, most of the bigger barbel were found down below Worcester on what's called the lower river, which is fairly deep and slow. And the fishing up through here, what they call Barbel Alley really, from Bewdley up to Bridgnorth, was more about numbers of fish rather than big ones. It was always really prolific. That's changed really, and in the last 5 or 6 years the numbers of barbels seem to have decreased a bit, but what has happened then is the fish have got a lot bigger. And I guess it's just the natural progress of things really. I mean, a lot of people forget that barbel aren't native to the Severn. They've only been here for just over 50 years, and it takes that long really for a few generations to come through and the population to start to stabilise, and I think the future's really bright. Yeah.
Well, it's been a brave man, old Paul, because he's had 1 or 2 disasters on tight lines in the past when he's taken us out fishing. That was a really lovely day, and you could see it was tough, but he made something. And the interesting thing for me was the size of the barbel, because he said they're bigger now than they used to be. But it seems a bit ironic these days. Maybe it's because you can't be so selective. You get the bigger barbel of smaller rivers.
Oh, without a doubt, some of the rivers near my home is, you don't, a 3.5 pound barbel, you just don't see them. No. But, I've only had 1 bite this year, and there's the proof of the pudding. Not
a bad bite, is it, that one? Let's have a look at that. Look, that's a bite, isn't it?
That's a proper bite, yeah.
And what did that weigh?
14.7.
It doesn't really matter when they're that big, does it? And you can see the river in the background. It's probably one of those places you've taken us a couple of times.
Yep, tiny little river that is.
Yeah.
So, but they grow big, they're slower, then they don't have to fight the flow. So and there's plenty of bait going in these rivers. So.
I think that's the important thing, the concentration of bait, like the old ooze fish at Adams Mill, that concentration of bait going into a relatively small area.
Yeah.
Do you think that the reason why Paul said he didn't get the 3-foot twitch there was anything to do with the length of the hook length? Because I've got this theory about barbel bites. When I used to catch them float fishing, the float would vibrate and then you'd be rescuing the rod. And I wonder if the original bite, the initial bite, is a little one,
absolutely,
and then they panic and bolt. Do you think so?
I find we all get the 3-foot twitch, but that is when a barbel has been hooked. Quite often you just get a bang, then the 3-foot twitch, and that's as the fish is going downstream. But I fish the float, and the float's going down, it just sinks under. You mend your line, and the next thing off it's go. You know, and that's your bite. So
it's incredible.
I think they everybody thinks that whack round is a bite, but it's not. We don't see the bite a lot of the times.
And maybe there, because he's fishing with maggot and the water, he said, wasn't speeded up a bit. It wasn't that quick. I just wonder if the barb will pick up the bait and that moves the rod tip and they're moving towards the feeder, eating the food as it goes, rather than taking it and bolting away from the feeder.
They don't know it's in their mouth. They're just munching on it, really. Yeah. So, the weight of the lead, as soon as they lift up, that makes them. That scares them. Yeah.
That's the rod tip back, and then the other thing as well is, of course, maggots instead of pellets, which is nice to see.
It's absolutely nice to see. Going against everybody else's pellets. So I know that that's an edge for a lot of anglers, even on the smaller rivers I fish. So
brilliant.
Nice to see. Yeah.
Welcome back. I'm in the company of top river angler Duncan Charman, and I know you've got loads of little tricks up your sleeve to show us. And the first one isn't really river orientated, you would think, because it's a completely new way of fishing bread on the surface. And, I mean, floating crust is probably the oldest bait known to man,
Absolutely.
or floating bread. We've been doing it, seen the fish come up, let's drop it in front of them. But this, so many people are unconfident with bread. They think it's fallen off, but this just stops it. Just explain to us what I've got here.
What it is, it's called a bread bomb, and you just roll a bit of bread flake up, you put it in the band. First, you can cast it out. And as you know, when bread's in the water, it expands. And carp love it. Again, we're all on the pellets on the surface, but a carp won't actually turn its nose up at a bit of bread. And the hook's proud. You can paint the hook with a bit of Tipex if you want to be really crafty. Carp come up, slurping away, job done.
Yeah, anywhere where ducks get fed.
Yeah.
Sometimes the carp are challenging the ducks for the bread. I've seen it on boating lakes and things, even on the river, occasionally on the Thames. You can see it. Some places, not where you've been carp fishing.
Absolutely not.
No. But we can have a little chat about that. You've had a bit of a carp disaster this year on the Thames.
On the Thames, I failed to put my boat on the Thames, so I've been trying to find them and going back to the old swims, and I can't see a hook a carp, let alone put a hook in a carp. Plenty of bream, chub, but can't see a carp.
And you're not on the bit that I'd call the easy bit of Thames carp fishing, the lower river. Once you get sort of probably from Walton downstream, or certainly from Hampton Court downstream, it gets a lot easier. You're fishing the middle river, which is a lot wilder, a lot trickier.
Yeah, I haven't seen a carp angler, any angler on the Thames this year up in the middle reaches, either side of Reading. It's just, as you say, there's no clues. You just got to look at the feature, use your watercraft. Obviously, mine's not been that good this year. And just, if they're there, you'll catch them. But obviously, they're not there this year. No,
it's a shame. But I think the best time for carp's ahead of us. I think September, October is
when the conkers are dropping.
Is that what you do?
Yeah, when the conkers are dropping in the water, that means carp on the Thames for me. Yeah.
Like me and the elderberries for getting on the river for the roaching days. You're a conker man.
Oh, I'm rubbing my hands. I need to get on the Thames then. Yeah.
Now, you said, I want to talk about float stops, and you think, well, that's, we've not got much of a subject for that for 15 minutes of tight lines, but these little creatures here, and I mean, this is how they're supplied. They're threaded onto this loop of wire, and just show us how you put one on the line before you show us what you do with them, Duncan.
They're fairly simple. They just all come on a little wire with a bit of loop. You get your main line, and you just put the line through the wire, pull one of the float stops up, and then just put it a little bit harder. As you can see, that comes up onto the line. And then you just put it a bit more, and there it is.
That really grips it. It's unlike a shot that will flatten the line or pinch it.
Doesn't damage.
The old ledger stops are quite good, but they're permanent. They're on the line.
Yeah.
And you've got several different uses of it. This is the first one. Now, this is an inline ledger rig, you've got your connector there at the bottom, and then your inline bomb, and I'm glad you've made nice small ones. We didn't have to bring 4 ounces of lead sliding up and down with its little sleeve on the end there.
I never use 4 ounces on a river. 1 ounce as big as I use.
Just enough to hold.
Just enough to hold. Yeah. Same with a feeder, yeah.
And there's your float stop, which this time isn't a float stop.
No, it's it creates what we call a bolt rig, but because the actual lead moves on the line, I can get liners, I can tell when a barbel's there. When it picks up, it hits that float stop, it just drives the hook down in the bottom lip. So
just show us how that would work then. If you pull your thing through, that goes to, it hits the weight,
bang.
The fish panics, feels the weight, and that's your bolt.
Yep.
But in the event of a crack-off, this is the great thing about these aren't fixed. In the event of a crack-off, that will slide up the line
and off.
So the fish won't get tethered.
Exactly. So it's completely safe, very safe way.
Now the second one is actually a float stop, and this is the old 10-pin type controller. They've come on a little bit these days. This has got vanes, so it's more like a rocket, so it'd fly through. But this is for surface fishing.
Fishing for carp.
Or chub on rivers with floating crust or whatever.
Maybe, yeah.
Weighted at the bottom, so it sits in the water like that with the line through the top. And the problem is most things you put on will make that line sink, but you want it all to float, don't you?
Absolutely. So there it is, it's locked on there. There's no damage to your line. You can just put your hook link on there, you know, 3 foot, 2 foot, as long as you want, slightly lighter hook link again. And again, if you break off, it's completely safe.
Yeah.
So,
but you can, if you want to take it further away, if you want to make it further away from the hook, you can just slide it up.
Straight away.
To lengthen your hook length without tying on. The annoying part, keep taking your hook length off, tying on a new one.
Again. So fully adjustable.
Good, there you go. And then, and these are, I don't know how much they are, not very much a packet.
Pennies, 99p a packet for, then you get, I don't know, 25.
Now this is a more conventional feeder setup.
Yeah.
But there you've got two, using them where you'd use a connector bead.
Yeah.
But you've got this tied on where you could, if you wanted to, have a swivel below it with a hook length. This is just shown for demonstration purposes on the main line. So if you had, say, like this is probably a 30 centimetre hook length with a swivel, then you've got your 2 stops here. And the idea of that is, of course, again, you can lengthen your hook length.
You can, if you get a crafty chub. But remove your swivel. If by a swivel, you've got 2 knots.
Yeah.
And the knot is the weakest part of your link. So if you're chub fishing with 6-pound line and you hook a barbel and you've got knots, if you lose one, the chances it's going to be a knot. Yeah. So with the float stops there, you can just adjust, get a crafty chub, you can just reduce it, lengthen it instantly again, and completely safe again.
And 2 of these is just enough with the feeder that it won't. There's not enough weight in the feeder to drag down on the cast, so they'll be fishing that length of hook length.
Absolutely, yeah.
And lastly, there you go. See how that works. So just so you can slide up and down. So it's a free running sliding ledger. And lastly. Now, this is something I hadn't considered, but of course it is so obvious.
Yep.
And the reason why I hadn't considered it is because it doesn't look like what it really is. But this is, if you like, a helicopter rig.
Absolutely.
Now, normally you'd have or even a chod rig.
Yep.
You'd have your hook length coming down from there, and these are your 2 beads on your main line or your leader. And of course, why it's called a helicopter rig, because it can do that, because it's a tangle-free system, basically, isn't it, in the cast? And again, the same thing applies, absolutely safe. Only there, you're trapping the hook length.
Yeah.
But once you've hooked the fish, it doesn't matter what happens to these. They can slide down to the bomb or feeder or whatever you're using. But this, you know, if we'd have had this years ago, we used to fish a rig on the Trent. I don't know if you ever heard of it. It was a long time ago, called the Dink Dink.
Yep.
That the Goldthorpe lads came up with, where you had a maggot feeder on the bottom of your rig, and a couple of feet up, you had a short hook length, which is basically a helicopter rig, but of course it was tied on like a paternoster. And the way to catch those silver bream, or poms as they used to call them on the Trent in those days, it was perfect, because the fish had just come, big hook, 16 hook and a single maggot. It looks silly, you know, compared to what you were fishing for the roach and those sort of things on the float at the time. It looks, but it worked.
Self-hooking rig again, boom, boom, job done.
Yeah, yeah. Now, are there any circumstances where you wouldn't use those, or do you think they're valid for almost everything?
I think every angler should have a packet of float stops in their bag. I've got them in the car, and it's got me out of trouble. You know, you forget your swivels and you think, oh, look, float stops. Yeah. So it's a bit like a Swiss knife, isn't it? Yeah. You know, if you forget a tin opener, you can get out of trouble.
And if you want to take stones out of horses' hooves, perfect. Yeah. What's this? Oh, you didn't get these out before.
No, they're just.
What's this about? I like these. Is this open? Oh no, it's a new pot. These are multicoloured. I found a way to open it. It's all right. Now, what's that about?
They're how you make a snowman rig. I love snowman rigs, especially on the Thames. And all it is just a buoyant boilie on top of a bottom bait.
So that's your bottom bait.
Yeah.
These are all brightly coloured signal.
Yeah, just sight stops really.
So that'd sit up on the bottom. One of those on top of the.
Yeah.
And what's that?
And then you've got a little glug in there as well, just to give it an extra boost to get some smell going downstream.
Excellent. Yeah, that's.
So they're just little, very effective. Instead of kind of making your baits and checking that they work.
Yeah.
These you can just buy. And they make, and that one's slightly different. That's what you call a glug and a powder. So again, instead of, you can just get your boilie, you can just drop them in there and you get this powder that gives off a leak off and a glug. So you get the best of both worlds.
Excellent.
So there's lots of things out there just to save a lot of time.
Our river is the Blackwater, and it's almost in Duncan's back garden, as it used to be in mine. And when I lived there, there were no fish in it because it was quite badly polluted on regular basis. But now it's full of all sorts of fish. There's plenty of barbel to be caught, and you said they're stocking it with some barbel.
I heard that the EA had put quite a few, 200 I think it was. Not
catchable size fish or small ones?
No, small fish to come on in the future, so
very
that's good.
Nice too. And again, if you can find a bit of flow, I know my mate Crispy's been catching there on the stick float, some good roach, some good dace. The water's not very deep. And the great thing about the Blackwater, some of it is club water, some of it's day ticket, but there's a lot of it free, Duncan, isn't there?
There's a lot of free stretches through there, yeah, and they're all really good fishing. I mean, I just love trotting maggots down there for some good chub. So,
and it's a good idea. You saw Fordy on the Avon there with a bag of maggots around his waist and a rod, bits and pieces in your pocket, landing net, go for a stroll, and you can catch fish from almost any swim you come
right
to.
on my street, just roving around, catch a couple of chub from a swim, move on, catch a couple more. Go back to the first swim on the way back, and it's an enjoyable day where you're just moving around all day.
And it's such a pleasure to get a drop of water that's come back from the dead, because Camberley Sewage Works used to pollute it almost on a weekly basis. That's been cleaned up, and the river looked great. There was just nothing in it when I lived there, but now it's full.
Loads and loads of fish in there, and some surprises as well.
Yeah, well, there always are on those little rivers, because people, they do the old illegal releases, don't they? Sometimes you get.
It can be. I've seen some strange fish in that river, but
What's a clue?
Oh some ghost carp, but they're probably coming out of Gold or somewhere like that. But there's some big fish, some big barbel in there as well.
Are there?
Yeah.
Oh, they're further up around the Sandhurst, around the lakes up there, aren't they?
Yeah,
It's a bit deeper up that end, I think, isn't it?
Yeah. Behind Little Molsham, the Crucian Lake, that area. So a lot of it's run by Hartley Whitney. So and above that, so there's some big fish up there.
And it looks lovely up there. It really is a classic natural river with bends and eddies and
lots of weed.
Lots of weed, but lots of weed means lots of food, means lots of fish, and that's what we like. Now, although you've not brought many pictures of river fishing for us to see, this is sort of a little synopsis of catches since you were last in. Now, that's something that a lot of people see, a lot of people catch, especially when they catch them out of reserve. I've had a couple of hybrids, roach bream hybrids, but of course, it's a silver bream.
Yeah. Absolutely, that one's nudging the British record. That one
was. Is it really?
Yeah, about £3.2, I think. I can't exactly remember, but I had 3 frees in 2 visits down at Mill Farm Fishery. So.
Mill Farm, that's somewhere that it's become famous for silver bream, but there's so many wild ones. I mean, I actually caught one. I don't know if I might have told you. So I won a £1.12 out the tidal Thames, when the record was subject to a claim with official £1.12 waiting for it. So I had an interim record. Didn't claim it, but it was lovely to catch a fish like that out the river. And they catch them out the Trent we mentioned earlier. And all sorts. The great ooze has got...
They used to be abundant in our river systems, but for some reason they just disappeared,
And now they're more often than not misidentified, aren't they? They're identified as hybrids. But roach bream hybrids look very different,
these are big eye. That's the main thing, a great big eye and almost orange fins. So
and if you look closely into my eyes, they're sort of lilac, aren't they?
They are.
Have you noticed? Lovely lilac colour on the...
They're gorgeous looking fish.
Yeah, they are beautiful looking fish. Bigger scales, as big reflective scales. Now that, Duncan, that's either been extremely greedy or extremely naughty.
That's an extremely naughty tench, but that was the highlight of my campaign, because I actually caught that one on the float.
Did you?
On the waggler, so it might not have been a double. It was £8, I think. So, but on the float, it means so much.
It does. It does somehow mean a bit more, doesn't it? Because it's more fishing than waiting to catch, isn't it? I mean, it's a bit snobbish of me really to say it, but Yeah, I've got to say, I get something out of chucking a wagger.
One on the float's worth 20 on the feeder.
Really?
In my eyes, yeah.
I'm glad you said that and not me. That's not on the float, though, is it?
No, that wasn't. That was on the method feeder
Was
distance.
it?
That was just over 16 pound a PB.
Wow. Now, method feeder, something that was designed for carp, and if you look at all the old match fishing tactics for bream and the big fish tactics, long hook lengths, small hooks, lots of ground bait, the method feeder blows them all out of the water, doesn't it?
Short hook length, 4-inch hook length for that. Yeah.
As strong as you like.
Yeah, carp tactics really. Yeah.
And be prepared to rescue your rod, because none of these little subtle lift-on swing tips.
One toners.
Yeah.
So I'd love to have caught that on the float, but when you're fishing big gravel pits at 80 yards, you have to use the carp tactics to get them out there.
And one thing I've noticed about big bream on those big waters, they're usually in the biggest bit. And people say to me, I'm going to this gravel bit I've never been to before. How do I find the bream? And I've probably never been there either. But I always say, go for the widest bit, go for the biggest. Same on rivers and canals, turning bays.
Yeah, best bit of information I can give you with big bream is hit the centre of the lake.
Yeah.
That's the best starting point. And then move to the wind, so where the wind's blowing. So get the wind in your face and fish at distance.
And use these things as
Oh, yeah,
well, because they'll give the game away quite often, and they're very distinctive. They're not like carp rolling, are they? They're
big, flat, oily kind of. Yeah, sometimes they're very splashy. It depends what mood they're in, but they're either splashy or you just get this big flat spot out there.
And just to remind us what we've got coming up, I think this might be the wrong end of the year, but I'd like to think that was an autumnal shot.
Yeah, that was spring. That was April. April. We're all a bit behind this year, so that was April, but a perfect tench morning that was.
And we've got that to look forward to, October, November, the system of mists and mellow fruitfulness, and when the conkers are falling, and when the hips and haws are ready. I once remember a friend of mine caught a chub from the River Thames at Little Whittenham, and he said when he landed it, he thought it had coughed up all the maggots. He'd been using red maggots in his landing net, and it had been eating haws and hips all day, and his landing net was just full of these red berries that are coming off the bank. So I don't suggest trying them on the hook, but red is a good colour for fishing in autumn, and it is the end of summer and autumn's coming up. Never mind, it's a great time. That's all for today, but don't forget you can find all sorts of features from the show on the website, and please keep in touch with us here via email and of course on Twitter. Thanks Duncan for coming, it's been lovely to see you mate, as ever.
Great as always Keith, really enjoyed it.
Me too. Now next week's show is all about carp fishing, when I'll be joined in the body by the 2011 Carp Angling World Champion Lee Jackson. We're on at 6:30 p.m. on Sky Sports 4. That's next Friday. And there'll also be a feature with Ian McMillan fishing for carp in Ladywood Lakes in West Yorkshire. So it's goodbye for now. Have a great week out there. Tight lines. Cheers, mate.
Watch all 6 Sky Sports channels on your mobile and online.